Kind of moving on to another topic that I think is, really, really interesting. It's been a topic that's been obviously in the news during over the last couple of years, as people are kind of adapting to new ways of working. Kind of in parallel to that, I think maybe, a little bit quieter has been this kind of innovation of kind of the future of work and people building and doing things in a permissionless fashion on Ethereum. So I wanted to invite Tina from the Station team to come and give a chat about kind of the work that's being done both at Station and just kind of broader in the ecosystem, and just sort of like kind of what is happening in the space and how Ethereum is impacting it. So Tina, without further ado, I'd love to kind of welcome you to the stage, and feel free to share your video, unmute, and yeah, it'd be awesome to go from here. There you go. Hey, Tina, good to have you here.
Great to see you.
Awesome. So yeah, feel free to share your screen if you have something to share, and I will get out of the way. And I'm excited to hear what you hear your presentation. We're excited about this.
Awesome. Can you see my screen okay?
Yeah, it looks great.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Tina. I'm one of the co-founders of Station Labs, and we're building a set of decentralized tooling to help contributors and DAO members coordinate and collaborate with each other more permissionlessly. So this is a very, very broad topic, and I kind of put air quotes future of work because we all know that it's been kind of abused as kind of this buzzword, throwing around both in the VC sphere and also kind of in Ethereum, and kind of wanting to start off as like, what even is the future of work? And we see that definitions have evolved over time. Some people believe that the future of work is remote work, is distributed work. There's this idea about new models of value attribution, distribution around creator economy, around gig economy, and then we have this open source ecosystem that is super, super close to kind of Ethereum's foundation and ethos, and generally the larger crypto ecosystem as well. So I think that honestly, it's a combination of a lot of these concepts all in one. And I think a lot of times when we look at what's happening in Ethereum, what's happening with DAOs, what's happening with this new class of labor, sometimes it's very easy to kind of see things in silos where, these are, very groundbreaking things are happening in Ethereum, which, oftentimes are true, but also, the same movement is also happening beyond. So I think the goal of the talk is really kind of put things more contextually and really look at the current stack of kind of global distributed work and, the kind of existing infrastructure to support that, and kind of like envision and ideate like what the possibilities could be moving forward. So a big move, around the future of work is really this idea of, in the past we worked in offices and now we're working online. But also this idea of like relationships are now becoming much more digitally native, where we meet people on Twitter, we meet people on GitHub, we meet people on these digital platforms, and then we, because of the proof of work, that it's both a very crypto native concept, but also it's a concept that is prevalent in other digitally native platforms as well, like GitHub, where you have a provenance of the work that you've done. And because of these relationships, you see this kind of reflection of the offline space being reflective of these online relationships that are also very authentically built based on what you've done on the internet. And the reason why we're all here right now, at ETH Global, is because of this distributed network, Ethereum, and now people are gathering in real life and like offline and offline, kind of discussing topics that unite us. And really kind of one framework that I really like to think about is actually through the lens of urban design, because why we need cities. I really love this book called Order Without Design by Alain Bertrand, and he kind of talks about how cities are essentially labor markets. And one quote that resonates with both myself and also a lot of other DAO leaders and founders in this space are really kind of thinking about the Ethereum and also generally DAOs as a labor market, as a city. So what does a city need? So we have, a well-functioning labor market brings together people with varied but complementary knowledge and skills, the preconditions for innovation, and a well-functioning labor market also makes possible every other urban attraction, like orchestra, museums, and art galleries. So we're already seeing that, kind of the early glimpses of that in crypto and in Ethereum ecosystem. We have protocols like Yearn and Index Co-op that are, very, very well organized and like corporative DAOs with a variety of different functions, the same way that we, in a company, we have all these different functions. But we also kind of see these urban attractions that start to emerge from that central economic activities of people producing valuable protocols, generating economic value for the Ethereum ecosystem, which, kind of subsequently increases the value and demand of Ethereum as a participant, just like how, the value of kind of the US or the value of New York is kind of increasing the demand of people wanting to migrate into that city and ecosystem. So, from urban attraction perspective, we see kind of ETHOV, which is, a great social DAO throwing events in real life in Idlewild, California, and which actually completely, I think, changes the town's perception of crypto. And now I am aware that recently they also received like a 13,000 donation to kind of spin up another like a more ongoing initiative on a local level to have kind of more crypto communities to gather and meet in real life and in Idlewild, which is kind of a crazy impact on the real world economy, if you think about it. And then there's, DAOs like Bright Moments, where they're hosting events, exhibitions, shows, inspired by their collections of NFTs. And really, like, their NFTs are great and they're beautiful, but it's very clear also that, beyond the art, it's much more beyond the artwork itself, where these artworks are just collections of identities where, people who have the same kind of artwork from the same city could find and discover one another and then go to these events and actually see each other in person. So if we look at Ethereum as this new city, then we already kind of saw this kind of early glimpse of, we have complementary skill sets and we have some cultural events that are happening. But as we know, like, it's still super, super early. And, many people are complaining about how the space is generally inaccessible for most people. And activities and economic kind of engine haven't really been started before we really can onboard majority of and more people into the space and benefiting from this ecosystem. Trying to go a little bit more philosophical and look at the dimensionality of work here, where what is actually work and what does work consist of? And I will say that there's like a few dimensions that we want to kind of use as a framework to look at where we are, in the digital labor space and where we are for specifically Ethereum. So for work, we have, tasks, we have mobilization, which is a group of people completing tasks and doing things towards the same goal. And as you build this meaningful relationships with the people that you work with, you're developing the sense of belonging, the sense of identity. And, as you slowly, discover these places of belonging, you also, actualize and really find out kind of what you are called for. And these are the concepts that should be familiar with anybody who has studied either urban design or just design in general, to understand, these are the different, some like to use the framework like Maslow hierarchy of needs, and others just like to kind of say a little bit more abstract. But if we actually look at the intersections of a lot of these themes, we start to see different shapes of work that is happening both within crypto and outside of it. So, we see gig economy bounty boards as sitting in the intersection of, mobilizing task and gig workers. We see in the intersection between mobilization and belonging, as corporations and global corporation startups, distributed work. And also, of course, we're very familiar with DAOs. And in the intersection of belonging and actualization, we traditionally have this perception of nation states and churches, but right now we see the rise of maxis and WACME culture and, kind of belief systems and almost like close to kind of a religious type of state that is being formed by the formation of also token networks. And kind of on a spectrum, we see kind of on the left side being, labor that is much more mercenary, like all the way to labor that is much more missionary, that are driven to a shared purpose, a mission, and also like the value that's being created. And those values are much less monetary, but more so around, your sense of identity and self, and what it kind of means to be a part of the network. And I think in terms of Ethereum, like this is a more realistic look at where we are right now. We have, traders, bounty hunters, airdrop farmers, one token, and Axie players kind of representing labor that's more on the opposite, like on the left side of the spectrum, which are tasks, more fungible tasks, and labor. We have on the right side, we have, meaningful labor that's being produced, which is storytelling and actually creating movement around, being a Bitcoin maxi or Ethereum maxi, and LARPing, which is, an ultimate form of belief, which is, role playing as an anon developer, or really kind of finding this new self on the internet. And then we have everything in between, which is kind of the real infrastructure to make this a viable path to connect between the tasks and skills that can be practiced in the Ethereum network, and also the meaning behind and the vision of decentralization and permissionless. And right now, the reason why I grayed out the two circles in between is like these are still being built and being constructed, and they're still super early in their formation. And what are they? They're the hackers, they're the product designers, they're the community stewards, funders, educators, meme perpetuators. They're the people that are actually kind of starting to realize the lack of infrastructure in this space, and how it's very, very difficult to actually sustain their living or actually have a full-time job just, strictly in this token network. And taking a step back to look at, how the global digital labor infrastructure kind of functions. And this is like super broad strokes, definitely a little bit reductionist, but really, there's a few layers here. On the foundational layer and the base layer, we need local laws and compliances to ensure that, if I'm a worker, I'm compliant of the local labor law, and also I'm getting paid in my own currency, so that I can consume, local goods. And then kind of in the middle, there's this network that allow me to find work in the first place. And those are the toolings and marketplaces, for example, Upwork and recently Brain Trust, that emerge as this, flattening of the global labor market, where, if we analyze like cities at labor market, we are now seeing that we don't really have to live in New York anymore to have access to a higher paid job. And that is the whole idea of, Stripe increasing the GDP of the internet as a payment rail. And I think a lot of the messages are also true here, where, with these marketplaces, now, if you are someone like anywhere in the world, you're able to find opportunities that otherwise you have not found in your local market. And in order to actually coordinate, people from different time zones, we're now seeing, productivity tools like GitHub, Notion, Telegram, emails, very standard boilerplate tools now, both in crypto and outside of it, being that coordination rail. But if we look at a decentralized digital labor infrastructure versus a centralized global digital labor infrastructure, what is different and what are the possibilities here, which I think is the most fun to think about. Like if now the topic is the future fork on Ethereum, is that right now, in absence of, local laws and compliances, in the absence of nation state as this enforcer and this forcing function of any type of viability and legitimacy and enforceability of agreements made between individuals, in absence of that, can smart contracts, can a lot of these crypto native primitives actually play the role of, providing that accountability and trustlessness between individual nodes and contributors in the network. And kind of looking being a little bit more practical here, I think there's generally two approach when it comes to constructing this base layer. The crypto rails, the payment rails, which is, I think, the most well understood, which is, embedded value distribution when you create some type of work. So that's, on a very practical level, that is like when you perform a task, when you, finish, a piece of work or a bounty, you immediately get paid in crypto. Or, when you farm, I don't know, farm in a Polygon-based game, you get paid in that token immediately, that can be consumed later or be staked in another protocol. Like these are very familiar, primitive for anybody who is here. But then I think the more interesting part is really about like, how can we actually start to radically think about the compatibility of smart contract and IRL law. And the other thing that's very interesting, but very, very hard, is about the enforceability. Like in absence of legal infrastructure, like can we actually enforce some type of outcome and consequences when, agreements have been violated? And this is like, I think, the least talked about. There are a few groups like LexDAO and WorkDAO that have emerged that are kind of solving that problem. But really, I think we're still super early in that development of like finding the right kind of legal frameworks that both work on chain to create that record and trust list feature of law, but also being able to be backward compatibility so that it can still remain compliant for local laws if that's the desired outcome, which I believe it is for many crypto organizations, irregardless of their status around like anonymization and pseudonymity. And then the more interesting and exciting part really lies in this idea of identity. So, when you are a labor and you're a contributor on Ethereum and, within this Web3 ecosystem, you have a wallet, what does that even mean as, now you have a identity that's completely different from the one that has been defined by traditional nation state and laws that have been constructed in the past. We no longer have a passport. We don't have an ID. So your ID really is kind of the activities that have been associated with the wallet. So there's some ideas here that I think this stack was made like in the past 48 hours. And really it was like a quick, just very, very early thinking around like the ideas around, the possibilities that can be enabled by a wallet-centric future. So we have protocol-driven marketplaces here, meaning that, with the presence of something like Uniswap or SudoSwap, the idea of having, a set interface and a centralized platform is less attractive. Like in reality, if you were to think about a more liquid labor marketplace, it could potentially be more decentralized and really be driven, and the incentives really be driven by the protocol, with kind of incentivized players helping verify the quality of labor, and the referrers helping, curate the network of talent as well, where, it's less so about the platform, but more about the individuals that are actually curating a talent marketplace, which is a very exciting feature. And then we have the idea of when you participate actively in the protocol and, when you actively participate in a DAO, how that on-chain action actually broadcasts to the entire network. And that becomes your reputation that we've, traditionally been outsourced to a lot of Web2 platforms like LinkedIn or Upwork. And then the other interesting things are like blurring lines between selves and groups. So as an individual, and as an individual who possesses a wallet, like you can actually sometimes also represent a DAO. And the idea of being wallet-centric, kind of creates the possibility of one person creating 6 and 7 wallets and representing different selves in different groups, group identity, if you also have a multi-signature wallet. And of course, like it's this kind of absolute kind of ownership over your work history and provenance, which is a lot of times not true right now, but the possibility of it is immense when, like, what does it mean philosophically when you actually have true ownership of, a lot of the things that you've done on chain. And the last piece, which is very interesting, is like when, in the traditional corporation, you get onboarded, you become, a worker, an employee of this company. And that means that you have the permissions and access to its set of tools, benefits, and all the implications of someone becoming an employee. But what does that mean when someone becomes a member of many DAOs and many communities? And how does that status translate between tools and tools as we, are moving into this more multi-client future and with protocol kind of at the center? And then, of course, with the coordination rails also will look different when the lines between organizations start to blur. Like we see, pods as a very popular concept, like popularized by Orca Protocol, now called Metropolis, where we see this idea of like your self-identity being represented by a pod that's registered on chain. And that kind of gives you access to a bunch of different, again, like other tools or information that otherwise you do not have access to. So looking at this whole stack, we see actually a lot of fragmentation across these, across the whole stack. So, right now we kind of see this fragmentation of identity and reputation and knowledge because a lot of the work is still being performed in Web2 platforms, so that, after you write amazing posts on discourse, like that post would not be associated with your identity when you move to another platform. And, the lack of data interoperability is a part of that issue. We see a lack of accountability, meaning that like if a bunch of pseudonymous people are working together, there's really no way to enforce that something is going to happen. And the consequences, are also, it's very hard to enforce. And even if we have accountability mechanism, right, like when there's dispute, Aragon actually did a lot of innovation here where they have a dispute court called Claros, I think. But actually, Claro is another project, but they basically create decentralized dispute resolution kind of channels. But right now, those channels are not properly incentivized either. So that there's still, like, I think a lot to be done there. And we're still super early in this future. But without these very core infrastructure, I think we're still pretty far from like kind of entering into this future. But with that said, some teams and some people are already living in the future. And then we have some examples here. So on the base layer, these are examples of escrow contract and backward compatibility, compatible contract that are created by LexDAO. They're super dope, like strongly recommend taking a look. We have identity layer that, is being designed by teams like Guild and some other teams being mentioned here. Really, the idea is that, once you are part of a DAO, like then, that identity of yours can be carried to any other applications that you interact with on the blockchain, on Ethereum. And then we have a coordination layer, which really is about embedding incentives when you perform a piece of work. And Gitcoin is a great example. There's already a talk on Gitcoin that was amazing, that talked about how, the Gitcoin's vision is really building this open grants protocol where, there's the kind of number of reviewers of, grants are kind of scaled linearly with the people that are applying for grants, that are designing grants. So there's some very exciting feature there. And then we have tools that are very tactical, like Wonderverse, which, is building a bounty board where after you perform a task, you automatically get paid as well by the work you do with like very granular, with the very granular ability to get like attributed both credit and also rewards. And putting a lot of things together and kind of share a little bit towards the end of what we've been building at Station, really kind of how we've been thinking about this is protocol at the center, and really think about, what are the universal data structures that can be leveraged both by us, but also by others, to build different type of creative clients to establish these trustful relationship on chain. And, on the client side, we have a very friendly app that allows anybody to propose to another person to work together in Web3. So if I know your ENS address, I can send it to you and be like, hey, like, do you want to work on this together? And define the terms of how the payment will be issued, like milestones, splits, vice versa. And then sign it to prove that, there's this public verifiable record on IPFS that, people can refer to if, were a agreement were to be breached. And then when those activities start to emerge, when people work together, in the use cases of, let's say, creator economy, like someone wants to engage, a community of fans, or in the case of a DAO where they're looking to sponsor, 100 developers to go on top of their protocol, and also involving the community in the decision-making process, we're seeing this emergent network of projects, protocols, contributors, voters that are all participants of this network that actually built a more decentralized reputation system that ideally in the future can replace, KYC, which crypto has a very ambiguous relationship with. So that's the end. Thank you so much for having me. I had a blast just talking through the very philosophical lens of the future of work on Ethereum. we can jump into any questions or ideas.
Yeah, sure. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Tina. I appreciate you jumping through everything with us. And yeah, that was awesome. I think you touched on so many of the different I think opportunities for like where like this could be headed. And I think it's still very early. And I think at the end there you kind of tied it up with like what is some of the current work that's being done in the space. And even that work, frankly, is very early. Like I think there's like a lot of opportunity for like new things to happen in this space. And yeah, if anybody has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. And in the meantime, I'll jump into some of the ones that I had going through this. I guess like, from my perspective, when with DAOs in particular, one of the main things that I've seen as requests from DAOs is basically, for lack of a better way of putting it, like talent, people that are smart, that are capable of joining those DAOs and being able to execute things on behalf of the DAO. I know you talked a little bit about like how we're kind of adding more structure into DAOs, which will also kind of help run those more efficiently. And I think also Scott mentioned that as well as part of his presentation earlier today on the public good side. I guess like it seems like to me the early experimentation there is more on that, if you had that kind of 4 Venn diagram image that you had, more on the kind of tasks and like very early work piece. What would you recommend right now to DAOs that are kind of like, what should they basically change structurally so that they can move like up a rank on that list of Venn diagrams?
That's a great question. I also touched very, very briefly about on this in the talk, where we start to see pods being a very popular structure among DAOs as like a subgroup, sub-working group. There's different names to it, but really it's just a group of people working together within the DAO and kind of give them the autonomy to make decisions kind of more in a more centralized way without compromising on the decentralized nature of the entire organization. So it's almost like there's some level of centralization on a local level, but keep the global level of the organization more decentralized to ensure that there's diversity of thoughts and opinions and no power is actually being over concentrated on the top. But in terms of day-to-day operations, we all know that like if it's truly decentralized, nothing gets done and not all decisions needs consensus. So it's much more frequent now. We see very, very centralized, almost like mini startups that operate within the DAO that kind of resemble this pod like or working group like structure.
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely noticed that that's been sort of a pretty like consistent theme, even just through like the work that I was doing as being like an optimism delegate, like moving from just like everybody reviews all proposals to now they have working groups as of this iteration recently. I know Gitcoin's done a lot of work in here. ENS has done a lot of work here too. And yeah, it's been really exciting to see. I have like a bit of a prop, but I'm not going to like force you to speak on it because, but I just saw this really interesting tweet this morning. Not during the presentation, I swear, I was paying attention. A tweet from Shreyas, who helps run Llama, that like hundreds of people today, some pseudonymous, are earning a full-time income working for open source protocols, getting paid in open source money, often gaining ownership over governance decisions in these protocols. This is actually wild and underrated. I think this is also very wild and underrated. I agree with him here. I'm not going to ask if you agree or not. I know I'm putting you on the spot there, but I mean, I think like that's, part of the opportunity is that outcome, right, for everybody, where they're able to kind of participate in such a way and get access to permissionless money, permissionless work, and just be able to like be, part of this ecosystem. You could speak to that if you want to speak to it, but if not, then kind of my main question was just sort of like, he said hundreds of people, for that to be thousands of people or tens of thousands of people, they need access to kind of resources and things to kind of understand the space a lot better. What are some of the kind of resources that come to mind and places to start for people who are interested in having that outcome?
Totally. I think back to the city analogy, I feel like we first need companies to be built in the cities, like create jobs to actually have kind of people migrating to the city. So I think we're still so early in that process of like just not enough protocols that are profitable exist to generate enough value for them to employ like kind of new talent. But outside of that, I think a lot of the things that we mentioned in the presentation still hold true, where some of the base layer, like the financial legal infrastructure, the financial is the easiest part in crypto, but the legal also is one of the hardest. It's like, how can we be backward compatible, but at the same time leveraging the power of smart contracts to automate a lot of these like traditional, very like kind of costly processes that are really hindering, a lot of these developing markets to tap into, what America's legal system, despite having a lot of flaws, still enable, which is a very, very powerful system for capitalism to shine, to kind of enable that those economic opportunities for more countries as well.
Amazing. Very, very cool. Well, thank you so much for answering my questions there. I didn't see any new questions come in on the chat, but I did see a lot of great presentations. This is interesting, excited about this. So thank you so much for being a part of this, Tina, and for joining us for this chat. And yeah, if anybody else wants to chat with you in a different place, feel free to drop your Twitter handle, or I'll give you like the shout out so that people know where to find you. Go, where do we find you?
You can find me on Twitter. I'm FKPXLS, fake pixels, but without the vowels. So awesome.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much, Tina. Really appreciate you. And,
thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye.